Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been careful with my money during college. Between textbooks, rent, and basic necessities, there isn't much left for luxuries. But there's one thing I refuse to give up: bubble tea. It's my small happiness, my reward after tough days. There's this bubble tea cafe near campus that I absolutely love, not just because of their drinks, but because the manager and I have become friends over the past year. She sometimes surprises me with a free drink, knowing how much I appreciate it as a broke college student. Last month, after finishing our brutal midterms, my roommate and I decided to treat ourselves to some bubble tea. I was looking forward to seeing the manager, but instead, we were greeted by an unfamiliar face behind the counter. When I approached the counter, I politely asked for a taro milk tea with boba and requested less ice. The woman at the counter, who had a name tag reading Karen, stared at me like I'd just asked her to solve quantum physics. She immediately snapped back that they don't do that here. I was surprised by her response and tried to explain that I usually get my drinks with less ice. I started to ask if she was sure she couldn't do it, but she cut me off sharply, repeating that they don't do that here, and demanded to know if I still wanted the drink or not. Her tone was sharp enough to cut through steel. My roommate shifted uncomfortably beside me. Feeling defeated, I quietly agreed to take it normal and handed over my money. My roommate placed her order next, keeping it as simple as possible after witnessing my interaction. We waited, and waited, and waited some more. Karen made each drink individually, taking her sweet time. I watched as she deliberately packed my cup with extra ice before adding the tea. The whole process took 15 minutes for just 2 drinks. My roommate suggested we head back to the dorms. We left, and I didn't taste my drink until we were back in our room. One sip was all it took to realize this wasn't just bad service. It was sabotage. The drink was basically flavored water, with mushy boba pearls floating around. $8 down the drain. That night, I created my first ever Yelp account. I wrote a detailed review about my experience, making sure to include every aspect of Karen's unprofessional behavior and the deliberately poor quality of my drink. 2 weeks later, my roommate convinced me to give the cafe another try. To my relief, I saw my favorite manager behind the counter. She greeted me warmly and immediately brought up the review she'd seen. She apologized and explained that Karen wasn't working there anymore, mentioning that mine wasn't the only complaint they'd received. Apparently, Karen had been treating customers poorly for weeks. I expressed my guilt about writing the review but explained how terrible the drink had been. That's when the manager surprised me by mentioning they were looking for someone to fill Karen's position and asked if I'd be interested. A week later, I started working there, taking over Karen's old shifts. During my training, I discovered something that made my blood boil. There was literally a button on the register for customizing ice levels. Karen had lied simply because she didn't want to accommodate a simple request. Now I make sure every customer gets exactly what they want in their drink, especially when they ask for less ice. For some context, my best friend and I hadn't seen each other in 2 years, and she finally managed to visit me for a weekend. She has epilepsy due to a head injury she got from an accident, which requires her to take regular medication and carry emergency nasal spray for severe seizure clusters. My aunt has always been difficult, but I never imagined she'd stoop this low. She's the type who thinks she knows everything and that the world revolves around her. When she found out I was in the area with my friend, she called me about attending her friend's baby shower. When my friend answered the phone, my aunt asked who she was in her usual fake sweet voice. After I explained it was my friend, she immediately launched into demanding that I come to her friend's baby shower, insisting that my cousin wanted to see me. When I told her I couldn't leave my friend alone since she was visiting for the weekend, my aunt got snippy and pointed out that she hadn't invited my friend, just me. My friend whispered that she was okay with going if she could wear her mask since she has asthma. When I relayed this to my aunt, she reluctantly agreed but demanded we bring a present. She hung up without even telling us the time or location. I had to text her separately for those details. I found a beautiful hand-knitted diaper bag I'd received at my own baby shower but never used. It was in perfect condition, and I thought it would make a thoughtful gift for the new mother. When we arrived at the venue, there were two rooms, one for adults to socialize without masks, and another room for the presents and the baby, with a clear sign stating masks mandatory beyond this point in bright red letters. Everything was going fine at first. My cousin and I were catching up while my friend sat at a nearby table. She'd already had 2 seizures at home and a cluster the night before, so she was out of her emergency spray. I should have been more worried about that, but I didn't expect what was about to happen. Suddenly, I heard screaming. I ran over to find my friend having a seizure on the floor. Some people were trying to force her onto her back, but I knew better. I positioned her head on my shoulder and turned her on her side, telling everyone to step back. That's when my aunt started screeching. She accused my friend of ruining the party and demanded she get up, calling her an attention seeker. When I tried to explain that she was having a seizure and couldn't control it, my aunt sneered that she could tell when someone was faking it. Then she did something unimaginable. She started kicking my friend in the stomach with her heavy winter boots. I screamed at her to stop while trying to shield my friend's body with mine. I kept yelling that my friend was unconscious and couldn't hear her, but my aunt wouldn't listen. She just kept shouting at my friend to stop being a drama queen. When she tried grabbing my friend's hair, I lost it. I punched her as hard as I could, sending her stumbling backward. Some guests finally grabbed her while someone called the police. My friend wasn't coming out of the seizure, and we had to call an ambulance since she was out of her emergency medication. The police arrested my aunt for assaulting a disabled person. The paramedics checked my friend over, and thankfully she was okay after about an hour. My cousin couldn't stop apologizing for her mother's behavior. But the story doesn't end there. My aunt is now serving time in prison for assault and harassment of a minor, plus disturbing the peace. She also got sentenced to community service. Her husband and my cousin moved out to stay with my uncle, while the husband considers divorce. He'll likely get primary custody and keep the house since my aunt doesn't even have a job. The only silver lining was that my friend was wearing 2 thick winter coats that absorbed most of the impact from the kicks. She doesn't remember being kicked, but she definitely remembers why she now hates my aunt. I've completely cut my aunt out of my life. Some people show their true colors in the worst ways possible, and there's no coming back from what she did that day. A bit of backstory. I'm an American living in Southwest Germany with my German wife for about 2 years now. My German isn't perfect, but I can handle daily life pretty well. I work at a small cafe about 10 minutes from our apartment complex, which has individual garages for each resident and a tiny guest parking lot that's a nightmare to navigate when someone's parked there. My work schedule is super strict. In at 7 a.m., out at 4:30 p.m. sharp, Monday through Friday. After working there for about 3 months, I started noticing this blue car with a black stripe down the middle, either in front of or behind me every day on my drive home. At first, I figured it was just someone with a similar schedule who lived in the area, but then things got weird. Every time this guy ended up behind me, he'd try to overtake me at any chance he got, even though we were in a long line of 20 to 30 cars all going the same speed. It was a 2-way road with 1 lane each way, and I'll admit I drove cautiously since I was still learning German traffic rules. I never went under the speed limit, but I wasn't about to risk a ticket either. This went on for weeks. He'd pass me almost daily, usually cutting me off so close I'd have to slam on my brakes. Then one day, he got super aggressive and almost sideswiped my car trying to pass. He had to bail on the attempt and fall back behind me. I was furious but kept driving normally. About 5 minutes later, I'm going up this steep winding road near my apartment when I spot a cyclist on my side. I moved toward the middle of the road to give the cyclist space since there was no oncoming traffic. Right at that moment, this jerk tries to pass me again. He almost hits me and I couldn't move right, or I would have hit the cyclist. He has to bail on his stupid passing attempt again and stays behind me. I finally get to my apartment, and who do I see in my mirror? The same guy parked behind me and looking ready to fight. I grabbed my tire iron from my trunk but keep it hidden, just in case. I tried to defuse the situation by asking in my broken German if I could help him with anything. His response was just to scoff and ask where I was from, adding a nasty slur about foreigners. I told him that my origin shouldn't matter since I lived here now. He went off on a rant about how people like me were ruining the country and that I should be grateful because his tax money was supposedly supporting me, which wasn't true since my wife and I both work and don't receive any government assistance. When I pointed out that he knew nothing about me and questioned what any of this had to do with his dangerous driving, he just got even more enraged. He was screaming obscenities at me when suddenly everything changed. The cyclist from earlier appeared out of nowhere, still wearing his helmet, and charged straight at the road rager. He slammed him against his own car so hard that the window cracked. While pinning him there, the cyclist shouted at him in German, and though I couldn't understand everything, I caught that he was furious about almost being killed earlier. This confrontation went on for a couple of minutes before the cyclist basically forced the guy back into his car and made him leave. A month later, my wife and I come home from shopping to find our garage blocked by, you guessed it, the blue car with a black stripe. Everyone in our building has each other's numbers for situations like this, and usually a quick text solves the problem. My wife starts typing out a message, but I call our landlord instead. When I explained the situation, she just sighed and said she'd handle it, mentioning that this wasn't the first time he'd caused problems. I suggested to my wife we get coffee at the cafe across the street instead of waiting around. We sit outside with a perfect view of the parking lot, and I finally tell her the whole story about this guy. Soon enough, a tow truck shows up. The guy comes running out when he notices, but it's too late. His car's already on the truck. He was yelling and causing a scene, but the tow truck just drives away. Then he spots us watching from the cafe. I just smile, wave, and take a nice long sip of my coffee, while he walks away defeated. The next day, his daughter, who lives in our building, came by to ask about what happened. When I explained everything, she was actually very apologetic about her dad's behavior, mentioning that it wasn't the first time his anger had caused problems. My wife, being the sweetest person ever, makes her cookies to show there are no hard feelings. The daughter found it hilarious that her dad had to pay 400 euros to get his car back and told us he totally deserved it. We ended up becoming good friends with her and her partner. Now, whenever her dad visits, he parks across the street and won't even look at me. He apparently takes a completely different route home from work now. Growing up, my parents worked endless hours at their small business while my siblings and I learned to make do with hand-me-downs and basic necessities. Everything changed when I was 15. Their business finally took off, and suddenly we could afford things we'd only dreamed about before. I met my wife during college. She came from a middle-class family and understood the value of hard work. We dated for 3 years before getting married 2 years ago. Throughout our relationship, there's been this ongoing issue with my parents that's only gotten worse since we tied the knot. One day, my wife expressed her confusion about why she wasn't considered family despite our marriage. I tried to brush it off, saying my parents were just set in their ways and didn't mean anything by it. She responded by pointing out how they deliberately excluded her every time. I could hear the hurt in her voice. I tried to minimize family trips over the past couple of years because I could see how much it hurt her. But then, the day after Christmas, my parents dropped a bomb. My parents excitedly announced they were taking everyone skiing, making it clear it was their treat, but only for me and my siblings. They added that my wife was welcome to come but would need to cover her own expenses. My mom gushed about the lodge they'd already booked and how wonderful the family experience would be. I could feel my stomach turning as I shared the news with my wife that evening. When I brought up the ski trip and mentioned how I'd always wanted to go skiing, she immediately guessed the arrangement, that they were paying for me, but not her. I suggested we try to save up for her part, but she pointed out the impossible timing right after Christmas. She called me out, saying I obviously wanted to go without her. When I tried to defend it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, She explained how they had deliberately planned this, knowing we couldn't afford it after Christmas. I suggested maybe they hadn't thought about the timing, but she reminded me they had plenty of money and could easily include her if they wanted to. She pointed out they've been doing this for years, and I kept letting them. I weakly mentioned again how skiing had always been my dream. She responded with understanding about wanting me to have that experience, but expressed how much it hurt that my parents kept treating her like an outsider, and even more that I allowed it. I called my parents the next day, hoping to find a solution. When I asked if they could help with some of my wife's expenses due to the Christmas timing, my mom deflected, claiming they were already spending so much and it wouldn't be fair to my siblings. I pointed out that she was family now, but my dad just restated that she was welcome to come if she paid her way, insisting this was more than fair. Later that evening, my sister called to ask if I was really considering skipping the ski trip because of my wife. When I explained how excluded my wife felt because our parents wouldn't pay for her like they did for me, my sister dismissed it, saying it was their money and they didn't owe my wife anything. I tried to explain how they treated her differently than everyone else in the family, but my sister just suggested I should be grateful for what they offered instead of demanding more. After a week of tension and endless discussions, I made my decision. I called my parents and told them I wouldn't be coming on the ski trip. My mom tried to blame my wife, but I shut that down immediately. I explained this was my choice and gave them an ultimatum: either treat my wife as part of the family or lose me too. My dad called me ridiculous and brought up their generosity, but I called out their selective cruelty to my wife and declared no more trips, meals, or anything unless they treated us both equally. My mom told me to stay home with my wife but warned me not to complain when I regretted missing out. 3 months later, my wife and I booked our own ski trip. Smaller scale, different resort, but together. My parents still aren't speaking to me, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm finally part of the right family. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.